Being physically present and emotionally present are two completely different things. A lot of men think showing up is enough. They assume that if they're at home, sitting next to her or answering her texts, that they're fulfilling their role. But emotional presence goes so much deeper than just being physically available. It's about connection. It's about showing up with your heart, your mind, and your soul fully engaged. A woman can feel when you're not really there. You might be sitting across from her at dinner, nodding while she talks, but your energy is somewhere else, stuck in your phone, distracted by your work, or buried in your own stress. She senses that, and over time, that lack of emotional presence becomes louder than words. It creates emotional distance, and eventually, it will lead to her feeling lonely in your presence. That's one of the most painful things a woman can experience, to be next to a man she loves, but feel completely unseen and unheard. Emotional presence means you're attuned to her. You notice the shifts in her energy. You hear the things she doesn't say out loud. You pay attention to the way she exhales when she's overwhelmed, the way her voice softens when she's unsure, or the way she pauses before bringing something up. It's not just listening, it's feeling her. It's being connected enough to understand her emotional world and safe enough that she wants to let you in. And here's the truth, it's not about being perfect at it. Emotional presence isn't about having all the right answers or always knowing what to say. It's about showing that you care enough to be engaged. It's about making space for her feelings without judgment or defense. It's about sitting in the moment with her, even if you don't fully understand, because your presence alone brings her peace. A man who is emotionally present is grounded. He's not just reacting, he's responding. He's self-aware enough to know when he's shutting down or drifting, and he takes accountability for that. He doesn't escape into silence or try to fix everything right away. He holds space, and that kind of presence, that's what builds trust. That's what creates emotional safety. You might be busy, you might be tired, you might not even know how to be emotionally present because you were never taught. But if you want to love her well, if you want to be the kind of man who truly impacts her life, then you've got to learn how to show up on more than just a surface level. Because emotional presence is not just something she desires. It's something she needs to feel secure, valued, and deeply loved. One of the most damaging things a man can do is lead a woman on when he knows, deep down, that his heart isn't in it. You might enjoy her company, you might love how she makes you feel, you might not even want to hurt her, but if you are giving her pieces of something you have no intention of fully offering, you're not just misleading her, you're playing with her heart. This isn't about malicious intent. Most men don't set out to deceive, but sometimes the desire to be wanted, admired, or comforted outweighs the courage it takes to be honest. And so you say things you don't mean. You make promises you're not committed to keeping. You give just enough affection, attention, and consistency to keep her hopeful, even when you know in your soul you're not choosing her fully. That kind of inconsistency is emotional manipulation, even if it's unintentional. A woman's heart is not a backup plan. It's not a placeholder for your loneliness, your ego, or your indecision. When she gives her emotions, she's giving something sacred. And when you receive that without clarity or commitment, you create confusion, she starts questioning herself. She wonders why you're hot and cold, why your words and actions don't match, why she feels connected one day and ignored the next. That confusion leads to self-doubt, not because she's weak, but because your inconsistency creates an emotional imbalance that affects how she sees the relationship and herself. Being unsure is human, but dragging someone else into your uncertainty is a choice. If you're not ready to love, say that. If you're unsure about what you want, be upfront. Don't use charm to compensate for confusion. Don't make her feel special just to keep her around while you figure yourself out. Every time you give her false hope, you're inviting her to build a future around a fantasy you're not really working toward. There's a weight to emotional responsibility that many men underestimate. It's not enough to not hurt her on purpose. You have to be aware of how your behavior affects her emotionally. Every time you flirt without intent, every time you send that late night text, every time you act like her man but live like you're still single, you're writing a check with her heart that your character can't cash. That creates damage she has to carry into the next relationship, even if you move on untouched. You may think you're just taking it slow or feeling things out, but if she's already emotionally invested and you're still unsure, that's not a balance, that's a mismatch. And the longer it goes on, the more pain it creates. Real love doesn't operate in confusion. And if your actions are creating uncertainty while your words are suggesting something deeper, then you're giving her a story her heart will suffer to rewrite. Communication is not just about speaking, it's about connection. It's how two people bridge their emotional realities, how they create safety, understanding, and alignment. But when a man shuts down communication, especially in moments of conflict or emotional intensity, it sends a loud message. This space is no longer safe to feel. And when a woman feels emotionally unsafe, the relationship starts to lose its foundation. A lot of men were never taught how to communicate, especially when emotions are high. Maybe you grew up in a household where silence was normal, or where expressing feelings was seen as weakness. So now, when you're faced with a woman expressing hurt, concern, or even just vulnerability, your instinct is to pull away. You go quiet, you walk out, you say, "I don't want to talk about it," and hope the issue disappears, but it doesn't. What actually disappears is trust. What fades is the emotional closeness she once felt with you. When you shut down, you're not just avoiding an uncomfortable moment, you're abandoning her emotionally. You may think you're keeping the peace, avoiding escalation, or protecting yourself from saying something you'll regret. But from her side, it feels like rejection. It feels like silence where there should be presence. It feels like she's alone in a conversation that affects both of you. That emotional abandonment hits deep, especially if she's trying to open up in a genuine way. She's not asking you to fix everything. She's asking you to engage, to show that you care enough to meet her in the middle. It's not about having the perfect words. It's not about being emotionally fluent overnight. It's about staying present when things get uncomfortable. When you go quiet, she doesn't hear peace, she hears disconnection. And the silence becomes heavier than any argument could ever be. Because silence doesn't just end the conversation, it ends the emotional exchange. It shuts the door to resolution, growth, and intimacy. When a woman brings something to you, whether it's her feelings, a concern, or a misunderstanding, it's not always an attack. It's often an invitation, an opportunity to grow, to understand her better, to deepen your bond. And if your first instinct is to stonewall, dismiss, or avoid, you're missing that invitation. You're showing her that she can't reach you, not emotionally, not vulnerably, not honestly. That teaches her to silence herself just to keep the peace, and once a woman starts doing that, the emotional connection begins to erode. Communication requires courage. It requires maturity. It requires choosing presence over pride. You can't build a healthy relationship without being willing to stay in the room, emotionally and mentally, when things get hard. Disagreements aren't the problem, emotional distance is. And every time you shut down instead of showing up, you create more of that distance between you and the woman who's trying to love you through the hard conversations. Every person brings a unique set of emotional, mental, and physical needs into a relationship. A woman's needs are not just random requests or emotional outbursts. They are expressions of how she experiences connection, love, and safety. When a man consistently overlooks, downplays, or dismisses those needs, he creates a space where she feels unseen, unvalued, and emotionally alone. And over time, that kind of neglect doesn't just hurt. It deeply wounds the bond between two people. It's easy for some men to write off a woman's needs as too much, too emotional, or too sensitive, especially if those needs don't match what he personally relates to. But just because you don't need constant reassurance doesn't mean she doesn't. Just because you don't process stress through conversation doesn't mean she shouldn't. Dismissing her needs often comes from a place of misunderstanding or ego, from assuming that if it doesn't matter to you, it shouldn't matter at all. That's not love, that's self-centeredness disguised as logic. Meeting her needs doesn't mean losing yourself. It doesn't mean becoming someone you're not. It means recognizing that love requires effort, and effort starts with listening. When she says she needs more communication, more consistency, more quality time, she's not being needy. She's trying to build a connection. When she expresses discomfort with your behavior, it's not an attack, it's vulnerability. And how you respond in those moments shows her exactly where she stands in your priorities. When a woman's needs are repeatedly minimized, she begins to shut down, not because she doesn't care, but because she learns that caring out loud isn't safe. She starts questioning whether she's asking for too much, when all along she was only asking to be loved in the way her heart understands. And once she starts silencing her needs to keep peace, you're no longer in a relationship, you're in a performance. She plays the part of being low maintenance, but underneath, she's disconnected, disappointed, and emotionally drained. It takes maturity to meet someone where they are instead of dragging them toward where you're comfortable. It takes emotional awareness to ask yourself, why am I resistant to this? Instead of immediately labeling her as dramatic or difficult. Sometimes her need is an opportunity, an invitation for you to step up, to grow, to learn how to love beyond your own preferences. Because real love isn't about convenience, it's about conscious choice. You don't have to understand why something matters to her in order to honor that it does. If she says, I need more clarity, give it. If she says, I feel disconnected when you don't open up, listen. If she says, I need to feel prioritized, not just included, don't argue, reflect. Love is not just shown in grand gestures, but in the small, everyday decisions to hear her, value her, and respond to what her heart is trying to say. Intimacy is sacred. It's more than a physical act. It's emotional exposure, spiritual connection, and energetic exchange. When a man treats intimacy as a tool, a strategy, or a shortcut to get what he wants, he diminishes its meaning and risks damaging the woman who trusts him enough to share that space. Using intimacy to gain control, manipulate feelings, or cover up emotional disconnection may satisfy the moment, but it leaves behind a trail of confusion, emptiness, and mistrust. There are men who know they're not ready to commit, but will still use sex to keep a woman emotionally attached. They'll initiate it not out of love or connection, but out of fear, fear of losing her, fear of emotional confrontation, fear of being alone. So they touch her body while ignoring her heart. They satisfy a need in themselves while neglecting what she might need: clarity, honesty, emotional security. That imbalance doesn't just damage trust, it creates a relationship built on false signals. Sex without emotional alignment sends mixed messages. You say you're not ready for a relationship, but your actions tell her something deeper. You say you don't want to lead her on, but you continue to engage with her in the most vulnerable and intimate way possible. That contradiction is what breaks her. She starts to question what's real, what's just chemistry, and what's manipulation dressed as connection. You're giving her physical access while withholding emotional truth, and that disconnect becomes her burden to untangle. True intimacy isn't about release, it's about resonance. It's about two people meeting in vulnerability, not just in physical desire. When you use intimacy as a way to silence arguments, to distract her from emotional needs, or to keep her connected while you remain emotionally distant, you're using her body to avoid your responsibility. That's not love. That's selfishness masked as closeness. A woman knows when something's off. Even if she goes along with it, even if she gives you her body, she can still feel the emptiness afterward. She feels the space where emotional connection should have been. She feels the coldness that follows the warmth. And the more that happens, the more she starts to detach from you, from herself, from the relationship, not because she doesn't care, but because she realizes the intimacy isn't about her anymore. It's about your comfort, your control, your convenience. Intimacy should be a reflection of emotional truth. If you're not clear with your intentions, don't engage in acts that imply something deeper. If you're unsure about where you stand with her, don't use physical closeness to distract her from that uncertainty. If your heart isn't present, your body shouldn't be either. Because every time you engage with her physically without being emotionally honest, you teach her to doubt herself, to question her worth, and to settle for moments that look like love but feel like confusion. A man's word is his weight. In a relationship, promises aren't just sentences, they're sacred agreements that form the foundation of trust, security, and emotional stability. When a man makes a promise to a woman, whether it's big or small, she hears it with her heart. She holds on to it, she builds on it, and she trusts that it means something. So when that promise is broken, especially without accountability or care, it shakes her belief not just in the relationship, but in you as a man. Promises aren't only about the actual commitment, they're about what they represent. When you tell a woman you'll call and you don't, it may seem minor to you, but to her it's a reflection of how much she can rely on you. When you say you're going to do something and you repeatedly don't follow through, you're not just disappointing her, you're communicating that your words don't carry weight. That creates cracks in the foundation, and those cracks grow deeper every time she's left waiting, questioning, or cleaning up the emotional mess left behind by your inconsistency. Breaking promises lightly comes from a mindset that hasn't grasped the full impact of emotional responsibility. You may not mean harm, you may even forget the promise entirely, but what's casual to you can be critical to her. That's why maturity means doing more than making commitments. It means honoring them, or at the very least, communicating when something changes. Silence or excuses don't patch the damage, accountability does. Over time, broken promises condition her to lower her expectations. Not because she wants to, but because she has to protect herself. She stops believing what you say. She stops hoping for follow-through, and that changes the dynamic in the relationship. She may still love you, but that love now comes with a wall. Not because she's distant, but because your inconsistency built the distance. Even promises you didn't explicitly make can carry weight. When you show up in a consistent way, when you behave like you're invested, she naturally begins to trust in a certain level of commitment. So if your actions change with no explanation, it feels like a silent promise was broken. That creates confusion, emotional whiplash, and a sense of instability that is hard to shake. Being a man of your word doesn't mean being perfect. It means being intentional. It means thinking before you speak, committing only to what you're actually ready to follow through on, and communicating with honesty when things shift. It means understanding that promises are emotional contracts, and breaking them, even unintentionally, has consequences. Because every time you give her hope and then pull it back, you teach her to doubt your sincerity, question your love, and guard herself from fully trusting you again. Trust is not built through grand gestures, it's built through consistency, and nothing damages that consistency more than careless commitments and words that never turn into action. One of the quickest ways to confuse, frustrate, and hurt a woman is by being passive with your intentions. When you don't know what you want, or worse, you know, but you won't say it, you create a relationship dynamic filled with uncertainty, mixed signals, and emotional instability. And in that space of silence or vague behavior, she's left trying to decode your actions, overanalyzing your words, and constantly questioning where she stands with you. Intentionality is not about being perfect, it's about being clear. A woman doesn't expect you to have every answer from day one, but she needs to know that you're showing up with purpose. If you're interested in her, say that. If you're still figuring it out, own that. But don't keep her around just because you enjoy her presence, while offering no clarity about where things are going. That's not kindness, that's passivity wrapped in comfort. Passivity often disguises itself as going with the flow, but that flow usually benefits one person and leaves the other emotionally drifting. You may think you're keeping things light or avoiding pressure, but she experiences that vagueness as instability. She can feel when you're holding back. She can feel when your energy is inconsistent, and when your words don't match your actions, when you say you care but avoid commitment, when you act like her man but insist you're just seeing where things go. That gap between behavior and intention becomes a breeding ground for doubt and anxiety. Unclear intentions lead to emotional burnout. She begins to overfunction, trying harder, giving more, holding the emotional weight of something you should be co-leading. She becomes the one asking the tough questions, seeking clarity, doing the emotional labor that your passivity avoids. That imbalance slowly chips away at her sense of peace, and eventually her sense of self. Being passive is not neutral, it's a decision. Choosing to wait and see, without being honest about that choice, is still a direction. It says, I'm not ready to lead with truth, so I'll stay silent and let her guess. But women don't want to guess, they want to feel emotionally safe. And that safety starts with knowing what they're being invited into, whether it's something casual, something serious, or something still in development. Silence leaves too much room for interpretation, and most interpretations turn into insecurity. If you're not ready for something serious, that's okay, but be real about it. If you're still healing or unsure, that's human, but say that. What's not okay is continuing to receive her love, her attention, her vulnerability, while hiding behind indecision. Because she's not confused, you're just not being honest, and the longer you avoid defining your intentions, the more harm you cause. Unclear men often attract emotionally available women, but their passivity turns those women into emotionally exhausted versions of themselves, carrying the weight of someone else's indecision as if it were their own flaw. Real love demands more than attraction. It demands accountability, emotional presence, and honesty. A man cannot lead, protect, or love a woman well while operating from confusion, passivity, or selfishness. Every action, every word, every silence carries weight. When a man chooses clarity over comfort, consistency over charm, and truth over convenience, he creates a relationship that can actually thrive. This isn't about perfection, it's about intentional growth. Stop doing what breaks trust, blurs boundaries, and damages hearts. Start being the man who builds with purpose, loves with depth, and shows up with integrity in every moment.